the recording and start the meeting, but I mean, by all means, continue. Continue on the interesting tangent. Um, so the meeting for this week is photo bashing. So hey, it is time for me to bash all of you over the head with all these photos. So just in the event that people don't know what it is, I'm gonna kind of go over the basics and the intros for it. Um, so you might be asking, well, photo bashing, you just put photos on things, right? And to that, I will answer that is not true. I mean, yes, you are putting photos on things, but it's a little bit more nuanced. You can't just slap photos on things and just be like, hey, that works. Because there's a lot of kind of legal issues you can run into, and it also kind of can work against your artistic voice in the piece if it isn't properly working in the piece and kind of meeting the aesthetic you're going for. So, in order for us to actually talk about kind of what it is, we have to kind of look at why it's used, what it's used for, and different ways to use it. So, I'm going to start bashing you over the head with photos. Um, so this is all of these are photo bashed. I'm not entirely sure if all of them are just full straight photos or if it's also like you have a 3D model and you kind of photo bash over top. I do know that this and some of them later on are just straight photos because funnily enough, this is actually Rio Yu's piece. He is currently in chat. So I asked him, and these are actually just full straight photos. Um, the reason why photo bashing is a discipline used mainly in concept art, although it's actually spread beyond just straight concept art into film, TV, other industries like that. And the reason why it's used is because having to render all these super small, tight details takes a lot of time. And why waste time rendering things when you can pull those kind of details in from a reference and use it in your piece? I probably worded that not super great, but honestly, it's just a time saver because if you can save time, that means you can work faster and work through things faster. The concept art industry is really fast. The faster you can do things, the better it's going to be. Because there's a high kind of, you get the project, it's due in about a week, or, something like that. It's also rather versatile. You can use it to create silhouettes, you can use it to quickly add textures, and pretty much it's just kind of a leap to kind of go from just like basic shapes into higher rendering without doing necessarily all that tiny little legwork that you'd have to get if you were hand painting everything. So the focus mainly is just to enhance, the artwork. It's not something that replaces fundamental skills, which is something I'll mention consistently in this talk. And that's because you really need to kind of have the foresight and the vision in order to properly incorporate these photos and these photorealistic textures you're working in. So as you look at this piece, everything makes sense together. Even though the foreground is a little bit more silhouetted, which, makes sense because that isn't the focal point of the piece, it still is in keeping with, the grunginess of everything they're bringing together in the photo bash, kind of logging machine that we have. Um, so everything, kind of has its own voice and it's brought together to create these cohesive. Oh God, hold on. Please hold. Don't look. Technical issues. Okay, let's try that again. Mouse, are you going to behave? Okay. Um, so this is another piece. This is one I'm not entirely sure about because it looks like the figure could also maybe be a model. Um, but this actually has its roots back in matte painting. So in the early days, back before we had the technology we have nowadays, very surprising, I know. It was actually used to bypass major limitations of, you didn't have to go to that location, you could save a little bit on budget, and also just technological problems they were running into because if you were modeling all that in early 3D technology, you kind of had to split things down and pare them down so you weren't overloading and overheating the computers that they were supposed to be run on. So by kind of implementing this photo bashing in, they were able to get the artistic voice they wanted without the super high costs of technology and budgets that would be needed to, either pay artists to hand paint all of it or blow up computers by just how detailed everything had to be put together. Um, so an important thing to keep in mind is you might be sitting there and you could just be thinking, hey, Google's a really big database for images. I'll just take from there, right? That's actually super dangerous. I would highly recommend against just scraping from Google because, I mean, unless you're using the filter to look for specifically like uh, not copyrighted stuff, you can kind of run into licensing issues. And if you get caught without the proper licenses, you can get fined heavily, which is not something people want. It's not desirable. So the important thing is to make sure when you're pulling, kind of these textures and these images, is to make sure you're checking the licensing and the rules, which are generally on them. There are like stock photos that you could use and you can license. But this is what I found. I have only really used textures.com, Adobe Stock, and Photobash Co. But I looked some websites up and an article recommended these. So for textures.com, all you have to do is just sign up with your email and make an account. You get 15 free credits a day. They do have the option to buy like recurring packages that let you have more credits, or you could buy premium credits for higher res things. I haven't actually run into an issue with just using the free stuff. Um, they have anything from 3D textures to images to seamless images, like patterns and everything. So it's definitely a good place to kind of just pull things really quickly. And I found their database to be pretty extensive, um, especially in like the texturing areas. Pixabay was another one that showed up on it. It's a big bank of photos. They have a video option too if you need videos for some reason. Um, I don't know much beyond that, so again, check their licensing, check what they have before you go start using their stuff. Another one I saw was Unsplash. It's free. It has professional photo grade images, and evidently they have a great variety. Another one is Blend Swap. It's a 3D image archive. So I guess they just have a lot of 3D stuff on there. The other ones I'm more familiar with, so Photobash Co. I've like looked on it and I've pulled some things. It's pretty similar to textures.com. There are free options, but they're severely limited. Like sometimes you only find 2 to 3 things if you can find things in it. It does have a lot of high res photos, but a lot of them are paid. They are similar to textures.com in the sense that you can buy credits. And I think they also have a subscription for stuff like that. And the other one that a lot of students don't know about is we actually have unlimited access to Adobe Stock. You can download and just pull anything you want. The only caveat is we have like a student license agreement with Adobe, so we actually, unless you go and license the photos, with a separate or your own account, you cannot use the stuff you're pulling from Adobe Stock from your student account in professional jobs. So there's that. So there's some additional things to keep in mind. Photo bashing does kind of have a little bit of controversy, although I think that controversy has kind of died down ever since, or as years have kind of gone on, it's not as controversial. Um, you may be asking, so it does all the heavy lifting, right? And the answer is yes and no, in the sense that, again, you kind of need to understand that you can't find everything you're looking for on the web. It's just, with the way our job is, we have to think and create new things. And the new things we're trying to create may necessarily not already exist in the capacity we want them for. So again, it's important to retain your own artistic voice throughout your process. And the way you can kind of do that is, and understand perspective. Make sure you know how good compositions work. Color theory is an important thing. And just, how things work in space and, all those fundamental drawing skills. Because the better base work you have, the better the piece will be because you don't have to rely on these other things to make the art work. You can make the art work in the first place, and then the other things come in kind of just as the additional cherry on top. The other thing to realize is it's a tool. It's, not sentient. It doesn't, it is a shortcut, but it doesn't shortcut those necessary foundations in order to make successful art. Um, you still need to know like how to properly apply it, if it looks right, the basic knowledge of like why are things working essentially. And a lot of people fall into the trap of it is a double-edged sword. If you don't properly work out your fundamentals, then, you can make a cool realistic art piece, but may not necessarily reach the goal or the language you're fully going for. So again, it's important to make sure you have a strong foundational understanding, which will just make the work better, and it'll make the work more unique because you aren't relying on these pre-made things to make the art work. Also, another thing to mention is in contests, like for ArtStation, I don't think in ArtStation you can use photobashing. So sometimes there's some strange rules of like no photobashing allowed, uh, for some reasons. So now that we've kind of gone over those basics of the do's and do nots and the hows and whys, now we can kind of just go and see how it works. So I'm gonna bash you over the head with more artist stuff because hey, there's multiple ways to do it. I do not know when my computer's freaking out. Alright, so the first way to do it, I'm not gonna start talk super in detail about this because I myself prefer having, my hand drawn silhouettes. I don't like relying on assets to do it, although you can make some pretty cool stuff if you can get to work for you. So, as you can see on the sides and the tops of this image, they actually show you what they're pulling from and, the forms they're using in these kind of different conglomerations they're doing. So this is an example of photobashing to make a silhouette. You don't have to, use multiple different things. Sometimes you can just mirror things and put different parts together of the same image and make something out of it. Um, as you can see, it's a quick, easy way to get the textures and kind of things put together. This is another. Oh, no, stop. Why are you doing this? Okay, this is another example of just kind of photobashing silhouettes. This is a video I have linked in my talk notes. So if you would like to watch the video of their process and them working through it, it's a really interesting way of kind of approaching it because all your textures and shapes are kind of already there. It's just about combining them. But the other thing to keep in mind is it's important to also, again, have that original, foresight before you start just throwing things together. Although it could also be a good way to make abstract silhouettes. So again, make of that what you will. But also notice how all of these things are mediated. So although you can see kind of the photorealistic details and all the textures they're using, you can't just point at that and be like, "Yep, I saw that on Google. It's from this thing, this piece specifically." They're always kind of put together in a way that is not super clear where the original came from. Now, this could also be from 3D models for this Last of Us piece, where they use 3D models and then they'd photo bash over it. I'm not entirely sure of their process, but that's another thing you can do is you could 3D model things and then throw textures over top. Um, Again, it's just the cherry on top. For anyone who does not know, this is Natyrix. They have a YouTube, and this is where I pulled their process images from. So as you can see, they're only using photo bashing at the very tail end because they have this strong composition. They have all the characters set. They have all the, computer forms for the most part already set in stone before they start adding, the little details over things. And as you can see, I don't actually know how many images, they drew themselves or what they pulled because they just skip from the top photo to the bottom photo. But you can see how they're mediated into the piece in a way that makes sense. The posters fit the lighting, they're folded over, they're torn, they have this kind of they've been here a while feeling. Same with the TV screens. They have that TV screen texture. They're not just slapped over top, and they also fit the perspective. I know the blood donor stickers are an asset that they created, and then they copy pasted it around on the sill there. And also the signs are photobashed, and again, they made their own asset before applying them. Um, so it's important to kind of set the groundwork in order to make a piece successful before you just start throwing things on your piece, because photorealistic textures are juicy and cool, but at the same time, if a piece isn't working, they're not going to make the piece any better. Uh, so there's that. I don't know. Oh God, my computer's freaking out. So this is another Ross Strauss example. Yes, this is photo bash, but photo bashing is kind of a slider. You could all honestly just use the texture as a reference to paint over, and you can just paint over to the point where the reference isn't actually super noticeable. So he actually does have his process. It's a YouTube video, again linked in my notes. But honestly, you can't really tell where the photo textures start and where they end. And mainly it's mainly the tree that was photo bashed, and then this sort of ground texture which he went in with his own brushes over. So you may be asking, I don't know why it's freaking out. How do I apply this? Okay, there we go. Some technical issues, apologies. So one thing to mention is some SCAD professors are completely against it. In their rubrics and their guidelines, they'll say no photo bashing allowed. Well, you see, the thing is, I said, haha, funny rule, I'm not gonna follow it because, it's a industry-wide standard that you can photo bash in concept and other things. So I find it kind of silly that we're not able to use industry standard practices in our own works. So I approached it from the point of, yes, photo bashing not allowed in this class, but if I do it correctly, no one's gonna be none the wiser. So my approach to doing it in SCAD classes is just don't make it obvious, or if or when you do it, mediate it in a proper way that it brings in your own artistic voice again. Because by having your own artistic voice and properly mediating these things, it just makes the piece stronger because you're not relying on them from the sole standpoint of, gee, these are gonna carry my piece, which I think is really important. Uh, God, I don't know why my computer's freaking out. Okay. So I've added kind of the tricks and cheats that I do. So my first one is find your textures. Another way to mediate them that I find super fast and gets me working really quickly is just use Photoshop's like filter gallery. I often use posterize just because it breaks things down in more digestible values and shapes and colors that work for my brain. It also simplifies it in a way that, kind of adds in texture, but isn't super, realistic. So it kind of pulls it back into where my art is in the way I art. Um, gosh, I don't, okay. Okay, there it is. So the way I approached it is I used posterize on my texture. I applied it to my ground in a way that made sense for the ground and the setting that I had. Then I just went over with a gradient tool and I just gradiented over and I reduced the opacity on that gradient. So that way it harmonized the values a little bit more. I added some lines and some additional values kind of just to paint over those really super hard edges I was getting from the posterize. And then just to finish it off, I added some highlights and you can't really tell that, hey, that was a photorealistic texture. Um, and honestly, the best way to kind of play with these things is I found using your layer options. Um, I I never use the same thing twice usually. Sometimes one's a hard light, then the next is a multiply. It just depends on how those colors interact with the piece because sometimes you can get really funky things. Like I think this was a hard light layer, so it really boosted that contrast in the rocks. Um, Next is trick two. So another interesting thing that I like doing, uh, more so now, is I like combining different textures on top of each other and just lowering the opacity super low and just letting them interact in their weird, funky ways. So on this piece, the main area here on the bird dragon thing, that oil spill texture is actually photobashed. So these are the two things that I used. This one on the left is the first layer I put down. I used luminosity. I put on opacity 77 and fill 3%. Uh, Another thing I've noticed is opacity and fill sometimes react the same, and then in other case scenarios like this react completely differently depending on how each one is opaqueness, if that makes sense. Um, these are from Adobe stock. I used them in a school project because hey, it's not being sold really. Um, and again, the second layer is just an overlay with opacity 100% and fill 11%. And if we wanted to look at the comparison, the left is the base work that I had before applying the textures and the paint over. So as you can see, my base work was already strong and my voice was already strong before I added in those additional little cherries on top for the texture. My stop. My third trick is I put a question mark because I'm not really sure if this counts as a photo bashing trick, but make your own assets. I know if you ever have Doug Soroyce, he's a really big he's really big on making your own assets to later put in your piece because again that helps ensure that you have your singular art vision and the pieces you're bringing into it fit your voice more. So if you can't find anything that fits, like for this project, I was like, gee, I need bird shape or bird themed tiles. I'm not finding anything that fits kind of the aesthetic I'm going for my city. So I made my own tiles, much to the dismay of my professor. So I kind of just sat in class and I was like, I need to make these bird tiles. So I'm going to make bird tiles and I'm going to photo bash them into my work. Um, and then for trick four, uh, the other thing is subtlety can be really nice for photobash textures. Why are you doing this? So as you can see in this piece, I mean, there might be some areas where you're like, yeah, that's photobash, but for the most part, you really can't tell what's photobashed. And in that sense, subtlety for these textures is just, again, the cherry on top, and it's not something that's really pulling the piece in the sense that the piece solely relies on it. So these are just some close-ups of areas I did photobash. As you can see, there's, kind of a wood texture. I used kind of this like rake brush looking texture. I used like a swirly, swooshy, scallopy texture on here and kind of this dotted, dappled wood texture. And just, to show the comparison, you really can't tell, the piece doesn't really change whether it has the photo bashing or not. For anyone who wants to go back in and look at the difference, I did hyperlink, the image if you'd like to zoom in and really see the differences between the things. But it's just to zhoosh that piece into its final form, and make it work as a piece. So for anyone who would like a recap, the tilder is photo bashing as a tool. It does not replace your foundational fundamental skills. Those are still important in order to elevate your art into, kind of a higher area or big higher level to level up your art. Um, Make sure you check your licensing details on stuff you're using. I mean, if it's kind of just like a study and there's like this one image you really want on Google and you know you're not going to share the study anywhere, by all means scrape from Google, but for classes and especially professional work, do not scrape from Google and use that in your piece because you may just get caught one day and it's going to be a hefty fine, if not more. So don't play with licensing rules because they'll bite you in the butt. Um, Again, it only serves as the cherry on top, and it just adds this extra low zhooshing to the piece. And then there's not one way to photobash. There's multiple different ways, and you can take it in multiple different directions depending on, the artistic voice and aesthetic you're going for. So that is the end of my talk. I don't know why my computer's freaking out, but any questions, feel free to yeet them at me or you know, another piece by Ryoyu. So if you want to ask him about photo bashing, I mean he's here.
Let's go, Tessa. Well, I have a question right away for you, Tessa.
Okay, what's up?
So I know you were showing your piece earlier. You actually showed a bunch of your pieces that you photo bashed on top of, and then you also, I know, do a lot of rendering.
Yeah.
Any tips and tricks to even not just photo bashing on top of what you already have, setting up your pieces to have good rendering with texture before you even go in with even more photos or the final zoosh, like you were saying?
So, I guess to answer that, I'll just open my Photoshop and hopefully it won't crash the stream and recording. I can,
Okay.
I'll go through my layered file because that might help show a little bit more of like how I approach it. Um,
Yeah.
so I have kind of two different approaches. I mean, generally after I photo bash, I usually paint over anyways, kind of just to hide it. But the way I kind of do it is I think about the plane I'm applying it to, and then I'll throw the photo on, I'll distort it as I need. Um, Sometimes I'll do like the Photoshop warp thing. I don't know if that's what it's called, but I'll like warp it into the proper shape or generally the proper shape if it's, curved or has like a weird line going through it. Uh, Lately I've been trying to kind of hide the fact I'm photobashing because I did have a lot of professors that were not fans of it.
Really?
Uh, Let me. Is that properly showing?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, and it's showing on the recording. Cool. So this is a piece I was working on recently. I actually have. Uh, uh, why are you not? Oh, there it goes.
Okay.
Oh, it's lagging. Okay. I think I think we caught up. Uh, so one thing that I do is if you look super closely, this little kind of bubbly weird texture is from a texture sheet Doug just hands out in his class, and I've been using those left and right because I mean it's really an interesting texture, and I don't think a lot of people have access to this file outside of SCAD. So it's kind of this unique, interesting thing that I'm bringing into my piece. And if we want to look at, my layer management is a nightmare, so I apologize if I give anyone an aneurysm. So this is kind of what the skull looked like beforehand. Um, I already had, the shape set, and then I already pre-added in kind of textures and details I know I wanted to use. So I was referencing like I think it was like a wolffish, and so that's where the shape came from. And their skull has these strange kind of striations going on, just after the eye on the back of their head to the gills. So I knew I needed that texture, and then kind of what I went through is you can see that kind of bubbly texture is already there. So the way I work is I have my values and everything set on just not. Oh wait, never mind. The wrong layer. I'm sorry, my layer management's a nightmare. Okay, so this is the base work I had before I started painting over. And I went up to Doug, he was like, hey, so that thing, more texture, please. We need more textures, strong base work, darken everything. all the crit magic stuff. And so I like to keep my paint overs in their own separate folder because I'll have parts that are painted over on these trees, on the skull, and they're all on the same layer because I'm a nightmare to kind of paint over with. This is just the way I find easiest to manage for my classes.
Mm,
Um,
that's smart though.
so
You have your separate folders because if you need to like change this lighting, it's
yeah.
separate from that base that you have is a really strong start that you can just always go back to if you wanted to change the lighting on the piece like right away.
Okay, so these are all the skull things. So if I mean, I did have some paint over before, but this was the paint over before I started adding my photo bashing. And this is different than the village piece I was showing, which I can pull up too. But Doug was like more texture, so I went in with my texture brushes. I just kind of went ham. I tried to think about like where the form of the skull, and I drew them properly or somewhat properly over the form of the skull. And then I went in with kind of these weird triangle brush. And then after I was like, all right, these texture brushes aren't doing as much as I want, I pulled in the kind of photo bash textures. So again, these are Doug's. Let me just show what they are. I'll just pull them up in a separate doc. Wow, you can't see that. Okay. Can I just let me disable that. Okay, that's okay. What if I do this? There we go. That's a little better. I don't know why it's so tiny. Let's open a new document. This is why I did not do a demo because I figured it'd be noodling. So this is the texture in its fullness.
Thank God we did not do demos anymore.
So I pretty much just copy pasted the texture, pasted it on. I kind of did move it around a little bit because I was like,
Hmm.
which piece should go where? And as you can see, it's not just the straight full sheet with hard edges. The only hard edges are where, it meets this top area. And I did that because, as the skull sits, underwater as it's weathered, it might form some bumps and, not every section of the bone on a skull may be the same. So that's kind of how I approached it. And then I was like, well, as much as I like that, I want more. So as you can see, that didn't really add too much, but it still kind of changes it a little bit. This one is, let me just copy, yoink it. This is that kind of sandy moon texture. This is the texture I used on the moon, and I think the backdrop in my village painting. And as you can see, it's soft light, 100% opacity, 17% fill. Doesn't do a lot, but I like switching between like, does this work? Does this not work? What is it adding? So I'll just kind of sit here sometimes for a few minutes, and I'll just kind of turn layers on and off. Um, Doug, I also noticed that the skull got a little bit too light, so I added a levels layer. I use a lot of layer masks because I find that's the easiest way for me to non-destructively alter a photo texture. Because, sometimes a lot of professors are like, I want you to enlarge this piece, and then if you destructively alter the photo texture, then you can't make that edit without maybe some weirdness. So I use anything. I use tons of layer masks. It's probably why my files get so big. This is 2.12 gigs. Make of that what you will. And then even then, like I probably could have stopped, and Doug probably would have been like, "Yeah, nice textures." But I said, no, it's not enough. So, I worked in more. I worked in with some more rake brushes to kind of add more like it's been scratched up, things have been eating on it and like tearing it apart. I also kind of worked more into these striations because I noticed they were getting a little bit lost. Um, then from there, I think it's just ground. Yeah, just ground stuff. Um, but honestly, most of this is just hand painted, and I think only the skull is actually photo bashed because everything else I was painting by hand. Um, I mean, for a different example, let me pull up. Uh, oh, hey, screwdrivers. Okay. This file is an absolute nightmare. It's also like super massive because this was back before I learned what was crashing my Photoshop. So hey, uh, and as a note in advance, if you save selections, like Chuck teaches you in 225 for some reason in the newer Photoshop 2023, it just crashes Photoshop, and even if you've been saving like every 20 minutes, you can still lose hours of work. Happened to me on 3 different projects, so I would advise against that right
Wait,
now.
really?
Yeah, I
I save
lost
selections all the time.
I lost like 6 hours on my Bird Oz project, and this one I think I was still in the stable version of 2023, but nowadays like new Photoshop is so unstable, it just sucks.
Damn, I might not have that version then because I save selections all the time. Never happened to me.
That's weird. I mean, it's Photoshop is so like temperamental too. It changes,
Yeah,
I feel like per person.
it
Uh
does. That's also a huge tip. The save if people don't know when you select something in Photoshop, if you don't have the newest version, so you don't crash your Photoshop. If you have a old version, selecting something in Photoshop and then saving the selection, and then you go to your channels and always go back to it and get that selection back is so useful,
yeah.
especially for like layering in texture, so you're not having to like remask out the same few things over and over again. You can just paint within. Like I usually do it for like I'll save my foreground, my midground, my background, and then once I keep going, do like a super foreground selection, and then I can just grab from there, and I don't have to magic wand everything or use the lasso tool.
Another thing that I've kind of learned, it depends on the like how you handle your masks. But for like later masks, like this level mask I have, if you have it just set to like there's no like shading or anything, like if I mean a lot of the times I'll work into a piece and I'll like uh this is not a good example. You know, I use layer mask to kind of I'll apply a gradient and then I'll paint out parts of the gradient using a layer mask. If it's not that kind of thing, like this levels, you can just select it and also paint that way.
Yeah,
That's one way to do it if you don't want to risk crashing maybe your Photoshop, but this is what it looks like if you do save your selections. You just go up to select, uh, it's save
right at the bottom.
selection, yeah, and then it just, I'm pressing cancel because I already have this, but like I have different pickles ones, um, so all you have to do is you have to control click your selections and they're there. Um,
Yeah,
so for this piece, all the rock textures are photobashed, as you I'm sure noticed because this was in the talk. This middle one was photobashed, and then all these kind of side ones are photobashed. Um, and I mainly did that because I said I did not want to paint all these rock textures because rock textures make me cry. So I'm not sure how much of this I can show because again, my layer management in this class was even worse. Let me just turn all these off. You know what? Let's just group everything that isn't a color. Up, up, Photoshop, stop. I think up to there is. Photoshop is angry.
uh,
Uh, okay. Um, So again, I shove all my colors on a separate layer because I'm a heathen. Um, so it's been a hot minute. As you can see, I don't label a lot of my layers. Shake my head. Uh,
it's no one does. If you do,
props to
I don't
you.
know, props. There's an award waiting for you, honestly.
Also, another thing that is kind of a saving grace is making sure you have not only your photo textures, but also like texture brushes. I know a lot of professors are like, make your own texture brushes so they're unique, and I'm like, but if it already exists, why not use it? And not everyone uses a brush the same. Like, I'm sure I don't use Irie Pan's brushes the same way she uses them because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
heathen. Um, so, these stairs aren't photo bashed at all. Um, all I did is I went in with like a marble texture brush and I just like slapped it on top of the stairs and bam, you got stair textures. And as you can see, there are 2 to 4 different textures on this thing because the more variants you can add, the less obvious it is of like, oh, you use specifically that brush. So again, kind of making sure you're adding kind of your own touch to things. And also like birds. I mean, I didn't draw those birds. That's a bird brush right there, but you can't tell because they're in the distance. And I think I like pasted 2 groups of birds together. So there's also that. Apologies if this is like super boring and not helpful to anyone, but like even with your texture brushes, like I just have Ross Straw's like big cumulonimbus cloud brush and I just slap that down and I just paint over top. 'Cause this is what it looks like without paint over, and I painted over it because I was like, I want more light on those clouds. So there's that. Let's just hide the clouds. I'm sorry, this is probably not super helpful. Okay. So, this one, I mean, you can maybe tell that it's photo bashed because this class was not a fun time for me. Uh, that's for sure. Uh, I actually do not. Wait, hold on. Uh, yeah, my layer management's a nightmare. uh, okay. So it is in this folder. Where is thou? Okay, there's the stairs. Nope, not that.
Those rocks are juicy though.
Yeah, so all I did is, again, textures.com. I am, not a simp for them. I swear I just really like their stuff. So as you can
Paid
see,
sponsor.
as like as you can see, like the highlights were not there when I initially did it. Like everything was just straight blocked in, and then all I did is I was like, hey, I like that rock texture, and you can see I used the posterize thing, and I was like, yes, juicy rock texture. Let me paint over that. So I kind of just, zhushed it up with some additional like, this lighting doesn't match, so I'm gonna slap some more lighting so it fits a little bit better. And then I also smoothed out those edges because I didn't want my professor knowing that I just stole textures. Again, darkening the lines, um, adding more lines, and then,
it,
adding those gradients.
it's funny too because like I know not using photos is totally not allowed, but also with how you can use texture brushes, sometimes it's pretty impossible to tell the difference. They're only gonna sometimes notice if you photo bash really poorly,
Yeah.
because they hate people that photo bash really poorly. But if you do it subtly and well, and or like mix it with good use of texture brushes, they're just gonna think that you painted it really well. So
Also, like,
at least my experience with the king hater of photo bashing bows or environments, like he has a grudge, but he also never noticed if you used photos
yeah.
well. That is, yeah.
I've photo bashed a bunch of things that professors are like, don't photo bash, and then they haven't said anything to me after, so I'm assuming one, they didn't notice it, two, they don't care enough to actually pursue you about it, or I guess they don't care. So there's like that, but I mean, even in like simpler pieces like this, all I did is I took a grass texture and I'm like, wow, grass. Yeah, grass. And then I kind of just posterized it. This is a piece I did quickly today, for actually a friend that needed it for their thesis. And I was like, I don't like how harsh that is. So I just kind of pushed back that harshness of it, I guess you could say. And I was like, I don't really like this super yellowy green, so I just added a darker green in the back. Uh, Normal fill 53, and then kind of to add a little bit of my own voice to it, I went in with the wand tool and I selected all the dark areas, inverted the mask, and then I kind of added in these nice little light. That's the wrong layer. These kind of little light areas, just to kind of feel like it was being hit by sunlight more. And kind of a lazy application of it on my part here, but again, I didn't have to spend 8 hours drawing grass, and it feels
Tessa, it looks good.
okay, cool.
It looks good, and for how fast. Sorry to cut you off, but I know you were gonna say with how fast it looks good.
Yeah, I mean, just like kind of thinking of different ways to apply them is really interesting. Like, here, let me dig through my archive and pull up a really bad photo bashing piece I did. And honestly, like, you don't have to go all out on every piece. Like, uh, you know, self-help or self-health, and all that stuff, of course, like, keep keep in mind because in jobs you can't give your 100% to everything, so it's always kind of like pick your battles wisely so you're not burning yourself out by going balls to the wall every time. um Let me find it. It's Ilu 204. It is my second project, and was it this? So this is an older piece, obligatory. I don't uh condone being this blatant in your photo bashing. But I photo bashed this wall texture. I didn't paint over it. The texture on the wall, this like kind of rust stain, is all photo bashed. I did work a little bit into it. As you can see, like I cut this corner out. I added some values under kind of that like bevel or like the piece that popped out. The guy's head is photo bashed. The speakers are photo bashed, and the bird eyes are also photo bashed. Um, and this like wood texture is photo bashed. So like I mean, if you want kind of like a better look, let's see. So for this bird, uh, okay. So as you can see, I have my bird base work, and then I painted over my bird base work. I made him fit mostly in the lighting of the piece. Again, I did not care about this class. There's that. And then so
Yeah.
this is the camera that was photobashed. Again, I ripped it from Google. Again, don't do that. Again, it's not being sold, and only the professor, I think, saw it. So, there's that. And then I kind of just went in and I painted over, and I was like, well, I want the eyes to be an emphasis, so I purposely went in and kind of highlighted that kind of radial, like focus part. I think is what it is on a lens. And then they didn't have any kind of like glassy shines on them, so I went in and I added my own kind of glassy shine and kind of values over top. So that's a really quick, easy way to mediate. Again, these came in as like just straight on discs, so they were easier to put into perspective because all I had to do was, shift it off to the side with perspective. Um, and also this guy's head is photo bashed. I just kind of ripped it from a stock photo site. Again, don't do that.
I
But
remember seeing you do that with the head. It was
yep,
really funny.
yeah.
Just
So
taking the head of someone else.
well, I found it and I was like, that fits my character. So I was like, I don't want to paint a human face, so I slapped the face on. I added like this full like different skin color layer. I went in, I kind of I flipped between the two, so I'd kind of like turn off the skin layer and I just paint in like the highlights and stuff he had. I lowered the opacity on that because I was like, yes, sky skin texture, and then I kind of just added values over top. This is not a super great example of photo bashing. I would not do it this way. Like if I was doing this project again, I would paint over the table with more like streaks and add like like the separation of wood planks. I would probably just straight up paint over these pipes so they're not photorealistic compared to like the birds, just to kind of tie it into my piece more. Um, just little things like that to kind of push them back in a way they aren't like bashing you over the head with "I'm a photo, I don't belong here," that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, we have like 4 minutes left, Tessa.
Okay. Uh
Last minute, any last minute questions that anyone has? If not, I have a follow up question. So for both, uh, Ryu, you can answer this too if you'd like. Um, any tips for people who are intimidated by getting into photo bashing? Because Tessa, I know you pretty much taught yourself how to do it.
uh I don't know. I think my main reason for getting into photo bashing is I was able to cut corners in rendering, but also I kind of just I was trying to render everything by myself by my own hand, and I just kind of started realizing it's unrealistic for me to just work that hard on stuff that isn't noticed. So I kind of approached it like it was mainly a mental like kind of thing I had to get over because I was sitting there and I was like, oh wow, I can't spend all that time. My projects due, in X amount of days. And it's not going to really be seen that much. So I finally kind of just said, all right, screw it. Let's just try different photos. And I kind of, it's, it's a lot like you kind of have to find what you like along with what works in the piece. Um, like, I mean, back in my 204 class, I didn't care. So I was just cutting corners left and right. I mean, I already figured out the composition and I figured out how the table is and how the kind of little like wing parts fit on the table. So I had that basis and I kind of knew the perspective I was working in. So I just kind of slapped that over top. If it feels overwhelming, one approach I would say is just focus on your composition and getting all that stuff set and done. Get all your shapes blocked in. If you want some rendering, like I'm more comfortable now with rendering and how shapes and forms work in space. So I have kind of that pre-understanding of like this light is here, so highlight here,
Mm,
shadow here, and I get that down before I even try and touch texture to make sure I have that strong basic connection working in the piece before I move into texture.
yeah. Okay, Tessa, we can unmute
Yeah,
Ryu because he actually wants to answer.
yeah, that's fun. You
How
have
do
to,
we? I
okay,
don't remember how to
so
do it.
if you
You
right
server
click
mute.
them, you have to server mute and unserver mute, which, you're free.
There we go.
I am present.
Hey Ryu.
What's up? Yes. So to preface what what I might say first, I sort of categorize what Tessa was showing off as more as photo texturing. I sort of have like a divide how I think about it, right? So there's photo texturing, which is basically just finding textures and applying them to like paintings, and then there's photo bashing, which is the final, like the photo is basically the final image, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you're actually putting on a normal layer and you're not just like overlaying as a texture. You're actually using the forms and shapes of the photo as like the finished image, which is what we do a lot of the time. But for beginners, photo texturing is generally a much easier way to just start working with photos. because like you can do it relatively unobtrusively, like what Tessa has been doing a lot. It does depend on what style you work in, but oftentimes, it's easy to just get used to working with photos by just like starting with photo textures, like literally just like find basic textures, right, like flat textures and overlay them on your work. And it's very easy to just like use layer masks or just erase out parts of them and just like keep it very subtle. That's a really good way to just get sort of used to working with like photorealistic textures, instead of diving straight into pure photo bashing where you're creating entire pieces with your photos. uh, that's usually a good way. And the other thing is to always keep in mind that the photos are not necessarily your finished product, right? You are, even in pure photo bashing, when most of your piece is photo, like whatever you put on a page does not have to be final. If you don't like what you put on there, you can always paint over it. You should paint over it, even in many cases. So don't be intimidated if you don't exactly like the look of it. And you can always tweak the photos to suit what your piece is. If you want to use photo textures, but you don't want it to look like, if you want to like use photos to basically save time, but you don't want it to look photorealistic, you can always filter those textures. I use like I have a software called Acvis, which sort of like just like filters into like oil painting, sort of like oil painting aesthetic, and I photo bash using that sometimes. And that works. Or you could like run it through like an AI generator and just like, oh, make this look less photorealistic, and it can do that for you. I've done that. I've used like AI to generate generate textures for me, bash onto like things as well. Like, like you don't have to stick to like only using like photorealism if you don't want to. And don't forget that it is not the finished product necessarily. If you don't want to keep it there, it is, think of it as a guide for you to work on top of. You don't be too intimidated by just like, oh no, like it doesn't look 100% correct. Yeah, of course it's not. You just put it there. You can always go over it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really like the not having needing or like the pressure of needing to lean on it as like a finished product, because I think we see a lot of like the, like for example, like your 100% like photo bashed piece that Tesla has up like right now, you see that finish and you think that it kind of, it's like you can get to that kind of quickly just like throwing photos in, but it's a lot of like
There's a good amount of painting in that piece.
It's a lot of work, right?
Yeah, like that was definitely like, especially for the foreground elements, there's actually a ton of texture painting with like texture brushes in there. So that, like, even technically I didn't use any 3D, but like there's a lot of photo, but I still went over and painted a lot.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for adding.
Of course.
Well, it is 7:03. We're not keeping anyone here. Thank you all for coming.